Welcome everyone to today's Emsi webinar. Today we're going to talk about Ofsted Curriculum Intent. This is part one of a two-part webinar series, and it's based on a number of conversations that we've had with FE sector leaders. Hosts of today's webinar are myself, Anthony Horne, and John Gray, who is our Director of UK Further Education. So to kick things off, I'm going to hand over to John to talk to us a little bit more about Emsi, who we are and what we do.
Thanks, Anthony. So first off, just for those of you who may be new to Emsi, just wanted to share a little bit of background information. So Emsi is a company based in the United States. We also have an office in Basingstoke in the UK. Our mission is to use data to drive economic prosperity. So the diagram here really shows this well. We see ourselves connecting people, education and employers using really robust labour market data, and in particular, as you'll see from some of the slides in the webinar, skills data. So looking at who Emsi work with and what we do and how our work is completed. So Emsi in the UK, we work across three predominant sectors of education, so that's further and higher education organisations, economic development, which is local enterprise partnerships and local authorities, and a new emerging market is employment, so recruitment agencies and corporate professional bodies. And we do this with a number of interesting solutions, whether that be software, API access or consulting projects. So going beyond the UK, as I mentioned, Emsi is a US-based company. We're based out in Idaho, a town called Moscow in the USA, and we're part of the Strada Education Network, and in work with a broad range of organisations across the US and across other parts of the globe. So a little interesting slide here that I've just inserted. So I was fortunate enough a couple of weeks ago to be over at our global conference, Emsi's global conference in the US. And this was a slide from one of the speakers, so it's just a screenshot from there. And I thought this was a really interesting and thought-provoking slide. So this is based on US data. I've not had a chance to convert it over to UK yet. So based on the average US female life expectancy data, this just shows that a female born this year would actually live till the year 2100. I thought that was a really powerful statistic because the presenter basically said, you know, thinking about that, it seems so far away, it's almost unreachable. But we're actually getting to the point now where it is very reachable. And, you know, his point was, have we got the skills? Have we got the skill system in place for people who are actually going to live through that period? So I thought that's a useful place to kick off our presentation today.
Thanks, John. Very interesting introduction and some pretty scary information there about looking into the future. And obviously skills of the future is something that we all grapple with here in the UK. But as well as that, kind of bringing things to the kind of present day and a big focus for us all, Ofsted and the latest inspection framework and latest inspection handbook. So we mentioned in the introduction there that we have both had a number of conversations with sector leaders over the past few weeks and months, and a lot of that has been around the Ofsted framework and the emerging focus of the handbook, whether that be that looking to the future, skills of the future and preparing learners for the next stage of their education and life, whether it be ensuring that curriculum meets the needs of the local and regional economy, having careers advice and careers provision that supports that and emphasises that, and also kind of implementing curriculum that allows learners to have the skills that they need to progress positively in the future. So from those conversations, John, and in that context of Ofsted and that real focus on intent, can you kind of tell us a little bit more about that and tell us a bit more about what we've been doing in those conversations and who we've been having those conversations with?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, just to share with colleagues watching the webinar some of the interviews that we've completed. So there you'll see a range of familiar faces, I'm sure, from across the sector, from various different positions, different colleges, and from different organisations such as local enterprise partnerships. So myself and Anthony have conducted some interviews with these people, and the recordings of those will be available as a series of podcasts coming out over the coming weeks. But what we wanted to do today is just share some of the key themes really that's come from those interviews, from those questions.
Thanks, John. And I guess some of the key themes that we've been picking out of our collective and individual conversations follow a number of similar pathways, and I guess the first there is around kind of how labour market data is integrated into college processes and also kind of sat alongside some other intelligence the college has, such as local employee demand and local employee conversations. So can you tell us a bit more about what sector leaders are telling us in that?
Yes, so a number of important points emerged really. Now I will just kind of say for listeners and watchers of the webinar, there is quite a lot of information on the slides. We've just presented there a few of the quotes that came from these interviews, but we will share the slides afterwards, so don't worry too much about reading those. We just wanted to share with you some of the key themes. So first, the senior leaders agreed it's critical to use a solid range of labour market information covering local and regional needs. So this is something that I've talked quite a lot about before, making sure that we don't just look at one actually small localised area or too great of an area. It's important to look at both and understand the strengths and weaknesses of both of those. Overwhelmingly, leaders agreed that it was imperative to use a variety of data sources. So clearly some of the people we interviewed use Emsi Data, but as well as that, using other sources of data. So whether that be talking to your LEP, looking at other government reports and things, what's happening in particular market sectors. Also overwhelmingly important is about talking to employers and making sure that whatever the data is telling us is also triangulated with what's happening locally on the ground. And that's something that came through time and time again. Interestingly, all the people who we interviewed, particularly the principals we interviewed, were using data as part of their to drive their decision-making processes. So that's clearly something that is emerging more and more now as a market, and using that labour market data to really get under the skin of what's happening in the local economy and use that to drive some positive decision-making. But what I think one of the most compelling points for me came from Liz at Preston's College, who pointed out really, LMI is about helping us to benchmark and ask the important question: are we genuinely delivering our mission? And her point within the interview was, if we don't understand that base point, if we don't know where we're starting from, and have that benchmark, then it's really difficult to show your current position and where you've moved forward. So I think that was a really good way to frame that discussion. A couple of other things that came through around this: often the skills that the economy needs are things which employers aren't aware of. So how do we start to understand that and triangulate that? Well, it's therefore important, as I mentioned previously, to work together. And this was one of the points that came particularly from Krisha and from another couple of the leaders. For the hope that colleges will work together and work with employers and work with the LEP for the greater good, so that we can collectively try and understand this. Really understanding what those skills gaps are, so that we can develop a more compelling training offer collaborative if that's needed. And finally on this one, just an interesting point again from Liz around the role of the nominee, which under the new framework changes so that the broader range of staff will need to be able to articulate curriculum intent. Clearly they'll need to be trained for this, but they'll also have to have a really solid evidence-based and understanding of their decisions and how they've shaped their curriculum. So that's going to be something that's worth keeping an eye on as the new framework takes hold.
Yeah, some really interesting stuff there, John, and some of those messages have came through in the conversations I've had as well. And in those conversations that I've been having, skills has really been a sort of watchword for sector leaders, and I know you've experienced that as well. So one of the things we've both talked about with sector leaders has been around kind of transferable skills and how they can be part of new curriculum planning processes and looking to the future. So what have you kind of found in more detail through some of your conversations on that topic?
Yeah, so you spot on right there. Skills seems to be the new word, one of the new buzzwords it's talked about time and time again, and it came through really strongly in the interviews and certainly at meetings that we've been in up and down and across the UK. On the Venn diagram that we put in the Emsi slides right at the beginning of the presentation, I'd put kind of skills right in the middle of that, because I really do strongly believe that skills data is what's really going to make the difference in connecting those stakeholders. So all the leaders generally agreed that technical skills are really important, but we cannot underestimate common and core skills. And the broad feeling is that we must ensure that students are agile and adaptable. And these things are quite difficult things to talk about, because it's quite difficult to teach somebody to be agile and adaptable. But nonetheless, those are some of the really core skills that employers are actually looking for. So we'll see from our data that a lot of the skills that we need within the economy, which employers are actually asking for, and we'll show an example of this later on our job posting data, are things like problem solving, communication, and creativity, which these skills appear for many different industries. And these are often the skills which employers often refer to as being those which make people employable. But as I've said, these are quite difficult things to teach, but nonetheless we should really try to do this, because these are what's going to set students apart as they move forward into their career, as well as some of the technical skills which they will learn. So Claire's point here though is really really appropriate. So thinking about changes to curriculum, that they don't have to be big changes. Often really subtle changes, and the introduction of a unit or a skill can really change the demand and make something much more appropriate and make a big difference to the local economy. So we'll try and show an example of that later, how that such a small difference can make such a big change. But I think another way to really frame this is to think that adding more of those common, those more transferable skills into an educational programme could make students ultimately much more employable than focusing on something more technical within their qualification.
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of transferable skills and skills of the future. It's something that we know that FE are really trying to concentrate on and trying to unpick. And it's fascinating to hear that sector leaders are talking about that so openly right now. And kind of taking that point forward, really, I know you've had those conversations with leaders about kind of future gazing, and you've asked them about a successful curriculum in 2030 and what that might look like. Will it be different from today? Will it be similar? Who knows? And it's really interesting to hear some of the thoughts that are coming from the sector leaders on that. And I wonder if you could talk us through some of those.
Yeah. So the as you alluded there, it's quite probably an unfair and difficult question to ask, but there were a number of, because it's so difficult to gaze so far into the future, but there were a number of common themes that came through there. Again, the fact that skills will be more central, and that was overwhelmingly the case, that leaders thought that they would be more central to the educational system. And there'd probably be much more of an emphasis on skills rather than qualification, so that we would be much sharper in our understanding of skills, and we would be able to articulate and signpost those better to young people and to students in general and to employers, but that would be more central to the system. Again, the importance will be around building on those common skills, so still having a really robust technical education, but ensuring that students are more resilient and adaptable and able to change quickly. I heard in a presentation recently at the conference in the States that most people in our lifetime will have between maybe 15 or 20 different jobs, so making sure that they have that resilience and able to adapt is going to be really, really important. To make sure that we're delivering the right skills, relationships with employers are absolutely key. And I think it's fair to say that from the interviews that communication will need to improve between colleges and LEPs and employers. And not that there's not good communication happening already, but it's making sure that we have a really clear and robust understanding of the skills that employers need and helping them to articulate that so that colleges can start to, and training providers can start to really develop educational programs which are going to meet those needs. But Liz's point again, really thought-provoking here. So how do we deliver the skills of today which while developing students and our colleges deliver the skills of the future? So how do we do it today, but actually then focus on tomorrow as well? And that's a really important question. You know, again, emerging theme through the conversations was about, well, let's get those transferable skills right now. Let's package those up. Let's start to work on that, those communication and creativity and resilience, as well as some of those more technical skills which are needed as part of an education program. But yeah, so that's a really interesting way again to frame it. You know, thinking now about changes for the future, we need to be prepared. So there's no point putting this on hold and thinking, you know, we'll catch up with it at some point. We need to actually, you know, start to think about this now and think about how we're going to start shaping our curriculum in the medium and long term, as well as the short term. And you know, Grimsby is an example of their Curriculum 2030 strategy, which you know, there's a quote on here from Deborah Gray, who's heads up Grimsby Institute for Further Education, Further and Higher Education, and I think Deb's words really sum this up well. So we cannot just educate our learners for now, we must prepare them for what innovations may be coming in the industry, which could be game changers. So as well as looking at, and we'll see a little bit later on in the slides, some different initiatives that they bring into the curriculum at Grimsby, it's about making that kind of a well-rounded, employable student.
Yeah, absolutely. Some fascinating stuff there about the importance of now and the importance of the future, and getting that balance is obviously very difficult, but something that I know that FE are trying to achieve, and us at Emsi are trying to support them with. I guess the next theme that would be interesting to explore is that of careers and information and advice and guidance, and how labour market data and labour market intelligence can support that. Again, I know you've had a number of conversations around that theme, and I'm keen to hear some of the key responses that your sector leaders have been coming back with.
Yes, information advice and guidance is something that I'm really passionate about, and something which I've you know, led strategically in a couple of colleges that I've worked in. So I was really pleased to hear some of these answers come through from our interviewees. So as you know, what really emerged is that as well as you know, working with employers, we've talked a lot about that curriculum alignment and understanding skills needs. What also came out as really strongly is the importance of telling students and young people in particular about what the future labour market might look like. And as well as that, we also need to think better about how we signpost the skills which they are learning and which sectors value. So an example I often use is, for example, someone studying a level 3 health and social care programme may as part of that course manage a small project. And what we need to do is really help to understand and explain to them that they're developing those project management skills, and that is a skill that's really sought after by other industries and other occupations. And I think we're not always good at doing that, about that signposting and making that clear about the skill that's being learned. Another, again, a message there from Deborah at Grimsby, so referencing their Curriculum 2030 project and showing the importance of offering innovative, forward-thinking curriculum to give students a taste of the future. So what Grimsby are doing there is having a variety of different educational programs, looking at really forward-thinking curriculum, and that's about giving people a taste of what the future might look like. So, you know, how can you aspire to be something if you don't know it exists? And it's using that whole adage. but I think that's something that's going to be really important to give a taste of the future.
Yeah, and some really interesting stuff there coming from sector leaders, and I hope you've all found that as interesting as I have. I guess where we can add value across those different themes will depend on exactly what a college is trying to do, but we thought it would be useful now to just give some hints and tips around where Emsi Data can actually help on some of those issues. So again, John, it would be really good to kind of get your take on that and kind of some of your kind of suggestions as to what we can do and how we might be able to do that.
Sure. So one thing that we have been working on really hard over the past 6 months is developing our tools and data in response to the needs of the sector. So we've had a number of colleges who've been involved with our innovation group, and we've developed our analyst tool and our course vision tool in particular, so that it really serves up decision-ready data in a number of short reports, which makes the tools really easy to use for busy professional people with, you know, now how busy curriculum and other staff can be working in a busy college environment. So I think that's certainly something that we've tried really hard to improve, and we've seen some great results coming from that. What I'm going to do is just talk through a couple of examples, really, just to show how Emsi Data can help in some of this challenge, and I'd encourage you to listen to the interviews and look at the transcripts, because I think there's some really rich information within those, and to give you an insight into what's happening in some of those colleges. So first thing really is to look at the data from a national, potentially right down to a more regional and local authority level. I mentioned this right at the outset in one of the answers, and it's not just about looking at one of these things. Often one of the areas that I spot when I'm working with colleges is that they focus on either a very small area, so just looking at a local authority level, or something as a broader region. And what they're doing there is missing some of the key information, so some key opportunities or risks by doing that. So Emsi Data, we can look at that from national level all the way down to local authority, and look at a level of detail around industries and occupations, and collectively putting that together, we can spot some really interesting trends and opportunities. Next is looking at our new economy overview report. So this is a tool that has been revamped in the recent months. So this is in our analyst tool and now in our course vision tool. So that's been added to course vision, brand new for September. Again, this is a really easy report to run. Doesn't take any kind of technical knowledge to do that, and gives us some insightful information about the region that we're looking at. So this could be a broader region or a very small, more localized region. So it gives us some headline figures like population data, total regional employment, and average wages. But it also as well starts to then plot out things like what's some of the key information, what's happening within that economy. So this one we're looking at job trends, so where the future job growth is going to be out to 2023, and then we can get into some more detail beneath this and see the kind of industries that are driving that. We also as well within this report show the top growing industries. So within a particular geographic location, we can see which are the industries that are going to be growing out into the future. And also on that screenshot there, you can see on the left-hand menu bar, this one's highlighting jobs. So this is, we're looking at the top growing industries with the number of jobs, but we can also look at top growth industries and location quotient, GVA and wages. So we can look at that same kind of report for all those different labels there. Next, we've added into this report, into the economy overview report, the top in-demand skills for that particular location. So this example is from Preston. So just to show you there as an example, so this is showing the top in-demand hard skills. This is from our JobBoss Analytics. The little grey bars there denote the national average, so we can see in Preston here as an example. The second top hard skill, which has been advertised for, is recruitment, and that has a slightly higher score than the national average. So again, this is really interesting to see thinking about how we build some of these skills into study programs, into apprenticeships, into short adult programs. Looking at some of the skills on there, we've got things like sales, customer service, administration. Are we giving those more transferable skills high enough priority in terms of our curriculum development? And I really urge you, on this, think using Emsi Data, using other sources of data, thinking about skills and not courses. If we look at this and forget about courses for a minute, or industries, or occupations, there's nothing on there particularly that's other than maybe finance that's too industry specific. The rest of it is more about the transferable skills. So another pretty cool piece of data that we've added to this economy overview report is the top skills by quarter. So this example is for Sheffield, and what we can see here on this chart is how those skills change over time. So over the past 4 quarters, we can see that management has been the skill up at the top of that leaderboard, and that has the most. That's the skill which is in most demand across job posting data. But we can also see there on the next couple down where the order of importance has started to drop. So communications has been in second space for the first 3 quarters, then starts to move its way down and is swapping places with recruitment and so on. So this is just a really good way of presenting that information, particularly to colleagues in organisations where they're more visual learner and they prefer a more visual way of looking at the data. This is a really smart and concise way to do that. So next, just look at some of our job post analytic data, and again, just to re-emphasise that point about looking at skills and not necessarily. So we have lots of information about industries and occupations, but looking at the skills data as well to augment with that, so you get a really rich understanding and informed by employers. So from those 2,749 job postings, the top hard skills, we see the list under there, and then the numbers on the right hand side, how many times those appeared in the different job postings. So the top skill there we have is JavaScript, followed by CSS and front end software engineering and HTML underneath that. So the point here is curriculum planning. When we get round to that time of year, web development, I'm sure most colleges listening will do a web development program. That could just be one line on the curriculum plan, and we know there's a demand for digital and web development, so that will just be nodded through because we know there's that demand. But actually, unless we understand the programming languages and that real demand underneath that, we could be missing a significant opportunity. Because if, for example, the college in Bristol isn't covering those types of web development programs, then they're not necessarily lining the students up who are taking those programs to get the jobs that are in demand in their local area. So that's a good way to think. Curricular changes don't have to always be big. They can sometimes be small and subtle, but very powerful. Finally, some data that we're going to be introducing into our tools very soon is around the occupations which are at risk of automation. So it won't actually look like this within the tool. What we will have is an automation score. But we know that the demand for jobs are changing. We know that there's a high risk of some of those occupations will either be replaced by automation, or the skills that will be needed on those jobs will be very different because of automation. So the data that we're going to be introducing into the tool will be this automation index. You can see there on the screen the graph, and one of the circles, one of the little dots there is highlighted red. That's the kitchen and catering assistant occupation. And basically, to quickly explain this graph, the further to the right hand side you get, the higher risk of automation that occupation will become. So what we're saying there is that role is at very high risk of being automated. So whilst we're not saying that it could be any time in the very near future, and whilst we're not saying that that jobs will necessarily be replaced or lost by that automation, it is really prudent to start and look at these things and understand if we are putting students out into the workplace where these occupations are going to be automated, how are their jobs going to change? What are the skills that they're going to need in those jobs of the future? So that will be something that's really interesting coming through. We will also be introducing our automation report over the coming weeks, so that's worth keeping out for as well, and some really insightful information in there from our innovation team.
Thanks, John. And I think that kind of brings us full circle almost to something that you mentioned in introduction about, how jobs are changing dramatically into the future. And I thought there was some fascinating stuff in there from sector leaders about that need to focus on the here and now, medium term, and perhaps long term as well. And things like automation are obviously vital to that medium and longer term outlook. So in terms of what happens next, and if you want to know more, firstly, just to reiterate that this is part one of a two-part series. The next part will be going out at the beginning of November, and I urge you to join us for that, where we'll be talking about curriculum impact and similarly sharing some of the key themes that have came out of our conversations with UK FE leaders, as well as sharing some ideas about how Emsi Data can help with that. In the meantime, if you'd like to drop myself and John a line, please do so. We'd be delighted to talk to you about any of the issues on today's webinar. You'll all receive a copy of the slides, and John mentioned that we'll be producing some other materials as well off the back of those sector conversations that we've had. But in the meantime, thanks for joining us on today's webinar. I hope you found it useful, and we'll be speaking to you again soon.